Welcome back. Today I'm going to try a Puzzle Rush Survival, which I only do about once a month as kind of a review of because it starts with easier puzzles and works its way back up. The idea is, as I've continued to advance with my puzzles and tactics, I should be getting better at this by now. My top score is 31, and here we go. This one might be a long one because I'm going to take my time when they start getting harder. But these first few should be relatively easy. We'll see. Let's click play. All right. There's no timer, so I'm not sure why it had to count down. This should just be a checkmate on the back rank. Okay. Yes, lots of the early ones are fairly easy. Okay, here I have a check, and I think that is mate. Okay. Yeah, a lot of these early ones are going to be easy. That's a check, but is it mate? Because the king's going to come here, and then I'll move over. I think that's it. And I think that is checkmate because the knight guards that square, and the rook will guard the rest, and the knight is guarded by my other rook. Okay, and I don't have to hurry because there's no points for getting it faster. The only reason I'm hurrying is just because I know the video could end up long. Okay. I think that's going to be mate because they can block with these two pieces, but I will just pick off them each in turn, and the king can't go anywhere because of the other rook. Pretty sure. Okay. An end game in which I have an extra pawn, but I'm protecting my extra pawn currently. However, I can pick up the rook right now by checking here. Is that the fastest best move here? I think it is. Okay. Wow, these are easy compared to those complex things I've been working on. Here, I think that's just checkmate in one. Because the rook, well, and the queen from there would prevent the king from coming forward. No, wow, there's a rook guarding that square. That's why I drew the arrow first. Okay, so that's not checkmate in one, but that might lead to checkmate because the king then would have to move back. Then I check, and when the rook captures, I take, and that's checkmate, I think. Okay. Now there's nothing they can do except take the queen, and then recapture is checkmate. All right. This is a little bit more complex. Where's my king? Oh, my king is right there in a really bad spot. But they can't attack it immediately because my pawn's guarding that square. My king is guarding that square. Let's see, what can I do? I have a check here that is safe. Nothing can block. If the king goes that way, that's mate. So I think the king would have to go that way. And then that would be check. And the king would have to go there. And that would be mate. Or something like that. I already forgot. Okay. Check. The king went that way. So that's just checkmate. Okay. Pretty sure the king should have gone the other way. Woohoo, we're at 7. There's their king, and there's my king. Their rook over here can't get in the game, so it doesn't matter necessarily that they have an extra rook. However, I can't quite check right now because I don't have anything guarding that square. I can't check with the rook. I can check with my bishop. And since my rook cuts off these squares and my bishop cuts off that square and that square, won't that be checkmate? We'll see. But I'm pretty sure that's the best move because I don't think they can block and I don't think they can move. And I'm pretty sure they can't capture the checking piece. Oh, wow. I'm way down in material here. However, I can check, and the king can't get in front of the pawn because my king guards that square. So the king, they can't block that check. They can't capture the checking piece. So the king would only have one legal move to go to h2. And then I would promote with check. The king would be forced here. Oh, I hope it doesn't go past that. But that, I mean, I only have two pieces. Right? I mean, I only have two pieces. I don't know why the opponent just went there. Oh, maybe that was my queen or something over there. It would be ridiculous, I think, to move my king at this point to most of those squares, because then they would seriously start checking me and I would lose my pawn pretty quick. So I think I have to check. Okay. And now there's nothing makes sense other than promoting. Just to be sure, because I only have two pieces. I mean, I only have a pawn and a king, really. No pieces. I have a hard time not thinking of pawns as pieces, but I understand that's the parlance. But yeah, I mean, a king move here doesn't make any sense. Okay, oh, I did go another move. That makes it harder. Because I have multiple safe checks here, but only one of them is better. Oh no, I have mate. Wow, I almost missed it. I almost missed a one-move checkmate. That's embarrassing. Well, that's why it says random chess person here instead of random chess grandmaster or titled player. I'm in some serious danger here from, I think, the rook and the queen are both on that file, but I am playing with the black pieces. I have a safe check here. White does not have any pieces covering the g3 square. That would force the king to one of two places. And because my rook is guarding that rank through this way, I think after I check here and the king moves, that would be mate. Because I don't think it's the check first with the rook, because that doesn't end up in mate. The king can escape that way. So I think it has to be the queen check first. Then it doesn't matter which of those two squares that the king moves to. That should be mate on g2. Should be. Okay. All right. What has just happened? They did not want a queen trade, so they moved there. None of my pieces are... Well, yeah, that one's gone pretty soon. If I don't do something. I can do something. Is that checkmate? I almost didn't see that, but I have a bishop that's backing up my queen, and the king can't come out here because of my rook. So I think that's checkmate in one. Okay. It does feel like I'm getting a little better, but again, so far these have been relatively easy. You can see here the relative ranking of these puzzles started at 160, and now we're only up to the 600s. And I've been doing puzzles in the 1900s, so these should be relatively easy for me. I think that is checkmate in one, because none of these pieces can block the intervening squares, and the king can't escape because of my bishop. All right. Okay, what do I have here? I notice I have a bishop and a queen lined up to that square. Is that checkmate? I think it is. Are we still doing mates in one? Just to be sure, black doesn't have any pieces other than the king guarding that square. And the queen, the bishop, the knights can't get there, and then the king has nowhere to go. Okay. I am playing with the white pieces this time. I notice that the king is in danger because the knight cuts off those squares, my rook cuts off these squares, and the bishop hits two of those as well. So there's probably a mate in one here. I'm just not sure exactly where. Is it right there? I think rook to g7 is checkmate. But I just want to be sure, because the rook would be guarded by the bishop way back here. And then the knight cuts off possible escape squares, and the rook would be covering the other two. All right. My previous record, if you remember, was 31. We're almost halfway there, and now I am doing 800 rated puzzles. Okay, the bishop has just come way down here. I can't take it, of course, because I have learned about pins. That pawn is pinned by this rook. I cannot move it. However, I think I can checkmate this king back here. But because the rook is guarding the back rank, I first have to check on f2. I'm getting better at learning the names of the squares. I am getting better at that. So I first have to check on f2, which is not guarded by any white piece. The king would have to go back. Then I check on f1. The rook has to capture, and then I come in with my rook, and I think that's me. By the way, these types of battery back rank checkmates that start here and you count the defenders on the back rank, I learned these not from puzzles, but from the Bobby Fischer Teaches Chess book, which I have reviewed on my channel. There are many dozens, if not a couple of hundred, checkmate puzzles in there, and almost all of them, I think the great majority of them, 60, 70, maybe 80%, are side file or back rank or front rank checkmates with rooks and queens and counting defenders and attackers. So if that's something that you have trouble seeing, definitely pick up that book or check it out from a library. Okay, I am playing with the black pieces. This pawn has just jumped forward to get out of this attack, I guess. My knight is defended by the pawn, and the pawn cuts off these two squares from the king. The knight cuts off this square and this square, and the rook cuts off these squares. So the king is trapped, cannot move. If I were to put my rook right here, then protected by the knight guards that square, I think that would be checkmate, because the rook would still be guarding the two sideways squares on the second rank. The knight would still be guarding e3, and the pawn is still guarding these two. So I think that is checkmate. All right. Now we're in the 900s, according to the little ratings here, although they're starting to get hidden behind my camera view. So, all right. My knight is pinned, I have just noticed, by that bishop move. This looks like 6 or 7, maybe fewer moves into the opening. We are very early in the game at this point. Okay, normally I would not do the queen to a4 check when the c-pawn is still here and the knight is still here. Because it doesn't win the bishop, because the knight blocks the check and protects the bishop at the same time. But in this case, it's slightly different. I noticed that in this case we have a pawn here. That means that at some point white played d5 and I exchanged my c-pawn for it, or I took it with my c-pawn, and we have not exchanged yet because black moved the bishop out before retaking my former c-pawn that is now a front-running d-pawn. That changes this, and so I think that might be the best move. Queen to, and they're preparing to castle, so if I don't do this now, I can't do it, I think. Queen to a4 check requires them to move the king, in which case I pick up the bishop, or to block with either the knight or the pawn. If they block with the pawn, again, I pick up the bishop. If they block with the knight, I take it with the pawn, which is why this position is different than these normal queen to a4 checks with the bishop here. The c pawn that is now my front-running d pawn makes the difference. I don't think there's anything else. It would be silly to just take that pawn. So I think it's got to be queen to a4 check. Okay, and they block with the knight, and then here I take the knight. If they take back, then I take the pawn to fork the king and the rook, or do I take the bishop at that point? I mean, here I have to take the knight, but the next move is the one I'm not sure about. Okay, well they made that choice for me. Now the question is, do I take here first or take here first? Because if I take here, that's check with the queen. And I'm threatening to promote on the next turn. That makes me, I think in a game I would snap retake the bishop here. But I'm wondering if it isn't better to do the discovered check first. Okay, this is, all right, I'm on the 17th puzzle, and it finally gave me a choice that I'm not sure about. I mean, obviously, check we look for before captures, and that would be a check, discovered check. But this is just winning a piece. Where's the king going to go if I make this check? If I capture on b7, discovering check with my queen, so c captures b7 check, the king will have three choices, two of which I can follow up by promoting to a queen in check. So I'm assuming if I capture that pawn with the discovered check, the king then will come forward. In which case I can check here and still get the bishop. Or go ahead and take the rook. Right? If the king comes up, yeah, that rook's now protected by the other rook. But if I take it with promotion, they pretty much have to... Oh no, I'm in check right now. Holy, that makes the choice for me. I have to take the bishop. Okay. That was embarrassing because that was a 970 rated puzzle. And I didn't see that I was in check. So I spent 2 minutes or whatever on all those complications. Okay, that was embarrassing. Here I have a few checks. I have this check, which just loses a bishop. I mean, it's not losing a bishop. It's an even trade, bishop for knight. But currently the bishop being here means that the knight is pinned and therefore useless temporarily because if it can't move legally. So therefore the knight is not protecting the c2 square, which I have a nice battery lined up on. So I'm thinking I should check here. The knight cannot recapture because it's pinned. The rook could recapture, or the king could move. If the king moves, rook captures c2 check. If the king moves, I just move rook to c1 check. And when this rook captures, my queen comes, and that's mate. So when I do this, I think this rook would capture, but then my queen captures, and that's just mate. Okay, it did move back, so it has to be this, and then that's checkmate. All right. Oh, that was my first puzzle rated over 1,000. Okay. White has moved forward a pawn. However, and again, I've been practicing seeing forced checkmates in my own games because I keep missing them. Here I notice that my rook blocks off the third rank from the king moving backwards, so the king can't come back here, right? My rook blocks off those 3 squares. This pawn, currently, because it hasn't yet been captured, blocks off those 2 squares. Let's be consistent with the color. The pawn, my g-pawn, guards those 2 squares, and my king guards this square. So it makes me think I should play f3 check. That would leave the king. Remember, the king can't move back. The king can't move forward. King couldn't capture there. He's blocked by his own pieces here and here. So he would be forced to h4, and then g5 would be checkmate, protected by my king. Okay. And that one was rated 1067. All right. Oh, okay. I'm in trouble here. There's lots of checking possibilities. Actually, that would be mate in 1, would it not? If it were white to move here. So it has to be me moving, and I have to be checking for mate. And that's not the right move because the queen guards the corner. I saw that immediately. I think that's the right move. Queen to c1 check. Because the king's trapped on the back rank, and the only possibilities for white would be to retract the rooks one at a time, and I would just take them. I think that has to be it. Okay. 20. We're 2/3 of the way to my all-time record. And now we're in 1,100 rated puzzles. Okay. I do have multiple checks in this position. Safe checks. That's a safe check. That is a safe check. Neither one would black be able to block or capture the checking piece. Either one, the king would have to move. This is not a safe check. Obviously, the opponent has 2 rooks on that file, which would just take my queen on d7. I don't like a 6 check because not only could the king move back where it just came from, possibly setting up a perpetual check. Actually, no, I couldn't recheck then. If the king, yeah, that's the problem with a6 check. If the king moved back, it's protecting that pawn. I couldn't take it. The king would be protecting that square. That square is well protected, so I wouldn't be able to check again except by coming back. So yeah, if I went to a6, the king goes there, I would just have to come back here. And we'd be where we left off. So to me, it looks like c6 check is better. Not only then my queen guards these 3 squares and that one, so it forces only one legal move. But then I pick up the knight afterwards. I can. I don't know if that's the best follow-up, but I think that's the best starting point for my checks. Right now I'm down material. I'm down a rook and a knight. No. I'm not down material, am I? I need to get better at that too, counting up the material. I have an extra pawn, 4 to 5, so I have an extra pawn. And my opponent has a rook and a knight for my queen. Okay, so I'm up in material. But I can be drastically better, more up material by this maneuver. I think that's it. Okay. And again, I don't have a follow-up check here other than going back to where I was. So I think it has to be taking the knight. Because if I go back where I was, we just get into perpetual check. And it's got to be taking the knight, which then leaves the other knight hanging. Okay. There's check, which I can get out of 3 different ways. That doesn't seem like a good idea, because then I would lose my material advantage after that exchange. The other 2 options are king to h1 or king to f1. I think king to f1 is bad because my opponent can follow with the check with either the knight or the rook. Wait, but h1 might be worse. Because if I go to h1, they fork me with the knight, check, and then win my queen outright. Okay, but if it's f1, and they check here, that's not as consequential. I can continue running. Also, if they use the rook to check, I can continue running. I just don't know which of those squares would be better. But I can't go there or there because of the knight. So I think it has to be f1. Again, because h1 just loses the queen. Oh, that was the end of the puzzle. Good. I thought it was going to keep going. White to move. Do I have any checks? Well, I have a free piece. But that may not be a good idea because of this, which will lead to checkmate very quickly. So I don't think taking the free piece is the best plan here. Right? That's just a decoy. Yeah, queen captures d7, gets my queen away from the action, and I think that's unstoppable, leaving me on only 1 legal move, and then that's made. Okay, so I'm not going to capture the knight, and I don't have any checks at all. I can't get my queen, I don't think, to anywhere that can check anything. So is it a defensive move? These are so rarely defensive in nature. This could be defensive and offensive. Moving my rook over to f3 not only defends, it keeps the queen from having access to my f-pawn, but it directly challenges the queen, which doesn't have too many places to go after that. Another way to defend would be to move up the f-pawn, but I don't think that's as good because it blocks in my bishop. And, well, let's think about that. Well, it doesn't directly attack the queen. That's looking like my... Because, like I said, I don't have any checks. My only capture is bad because it leads to an almost immediate checkmate. So a threat has to be better. Has to be my best move. Rook to f3. Then where does the queen go? That has to be the question. Rook to f3 directly challenges the queen. Where's it going to go? It could capture, but then my bishop takes back, and I think I'm in a pretty good situation. So it's probably not going to do that. And if it moves backward anywhere, either my pawn or rook will capture it. If it moves here, my pawn will capture it. If it moves here, it will be aiming at this pawn again, but now that pawn's protected by my rook. So it might go there. It could also go back on this diagonal to be safe. If it went there, I would have a discovered attack. When I move the rook, the bishop would be hitting it. And it wouldn't go there because of the rook and pawn, there because of this rook, and there because of this rook. Okay, so most likely it would go to one of those 3 squares. But that's pretty limiting. So I think that's the best move. And then I can pick up the knight. Maybe. Okay, it did go to that square. But now it's not really threatening this because both my rook and my king guard that pawn. And it's not threatening this because it's guarded by the bishop. Yes, and me taking the knight is a threat here because both my rook and queen would be pointing at it. Okay. That was a 1200 rated puzzle. For me, everything from about 1200 and up feels about the same as far as complicated. I do have a check, but that can't be right. Right? The queen is guarding that spot. Well, the king's guarding that spot for that matter. And I don't have any follow-ups. I could not follow up even if my pawn wasn't in the way because the knight guards that square. So, I do have a capture. No other checks, right? Okay, there are a few complications here. I have a capture, but I don't know how good that is. It looks like just a free piece, but sometimes that's not the best move. I know that this rook can't move right now. Not that it would want to because my rook is guarded, but it can't, it legally can, but it probably doesn't want to move right now. So this rook is effectively pinned. No, it's not. It seems like it is, but it could go here because that's check. And when I recaptured with whatever piece I recaptured with, then the queen could just pick up that bishop for free. So that makes me think that I do need to worry about that. Take this bishop later. If I capture the rook for the bishop, so I would be up in exchange, then I could take the bishop with my rook, and when the queen recaptures, my knight here can fork the queen and the rook. Also, if the queen recaptures, this knight's left hanging and that bishop's still hanging. That leads me to believe I should take this rook first. If I take this bishop first, I think this rook is going to get up to some problems down here and I'm going to lose that bishop. Anyway. And this bishop I don't have to worry about right now because when I take this, their queen will be under threat. And I think that they would then take back here first before worrying about that. So I'm going to take the rook. Okay. And now, should I take the bishop? Or do what I originally said, which was try to set up a fork? It's tempting. It's tempting. Both of them are tempting. This is just a free piece, but then what does black do? If I do that, and they recapture, and I fork, where does the queen go? Or what do they do? That's a good question. It might come here, protected by the knight, threatening my queen. But then I could take the knight once the queen moves. That's the other thing. I might not do the fork. I might do the just capturing the knight back. Okay, this is I have a hard time determining which of these moves is better. Because that's just a free piece. Whereas this depends on a tactic that I'm not sure is that effective, because I wouldn't end up winning the queen. I would end up winning the rook, possibly for a knight. And I can always do that after taking the bishop. That's hard. That's hard. But this is fairly safe right now because of the pawn. But my queen, see, that's why I think I should take the bishop first, because this bishop can come back here, directly hitting my queen if I don't take it now, and it would be protected by its own knight at that point. So I'm going to take the bishop. Okay, wow. That was only 1253. But yeah, they're definitely getting harder, and now this is going to be a long video. Maybe my longest, I don't know. I'm down a piece, I see that. What's my move here? I almost missed it, but isn't that just checkmate? I almost missed it. I'm not in check right now. If I try to check with one of these rook moves here, the king just takes my pawn, and then we're not going to do it. But they can't block or capture or get out of the way. That was 1301. See, that one should have been like 800. Okay. Oh, wow. They're about to promote with a discovered check, so I need to act quickly. I can check here, but then doesn't the king just come around? And if I check anywhere else, I lose the pawn or the queen. For example, if I check here, I am guarding the promotion square, but I think that's irrelevant. If I check there, I think the king just takes my pawn, and there's nothing I can do about it. If I check there or there, I just lose my queen to their queen, and then I'm in trouble. And then afterwards, I'm going to lose this pawn anyway. There's that check, but that just loses the pawn, and I don't have any follow-up. So I think this has to be the best check. The king would not be able to go, it would only be able to go here and here. It would not go to the first rank because that would be made. So I think if I check here, this king will come this way. Then I check here on D2. And the king could not get out of check here because of the other pawn. It would have to get out of check there. And then I check on C2, skewering the queen. I think that's this. Yeah, okay. 25. Oh, and that was 1392, almost to 1400. Okay, I do have a check, but I lose the queen for a knight if I check there. Do I have any other checks? I don't think so. For example, I can't get the knight anywhere that can check. I can't check with the rook. My bishop is kind of blocked in by my own pieces. My other rook is blocked in by its own piece. So, just to follow and be sure, I don't know which piece they would take back with, probably the queen. Yes, I do see the other capture there. I'm just doing checks first. I think in that case they would just capture with the queen, and then and that would be very bad. Okay. Or the pawn. I think whichever... I mean, if they captured with the pawn, then I take their queen. But I don't think that would be great, would it? If I take... Okay, let's go to captures now. I think that I have 3 possible captures in this position. Well, that one too. I do have that one. But I don't think that's really great. I think taking the pawn would end up with this, with the knight and the queen hitting me. I would have to take the queen. They would take, and I would take. Well, we would end up even. Okay, so that's not it. But if I take their queen now, they're going to take back. No. If I take their queen now, they're going to take my queen. At least that's what I would do. And then I would fork them here with my knight, hitting the rook and the king at the same time, and I would also win the rook. So I think that's the move. Capturing the rook now. That's another good move, though. Because if I take the rook now, if they capture back, I get their queen. Okay, so there I would get a rook and a queen for a queen and a knight. If I go that way. If that's the moves they make. I assume they would capture back. So I get a rook for a queen, and then a queen for a knight. So a rook and a queen for a queen and a knight, that gives me up the exchange. But if I went the other way, where I take the queen first, and they take mine, and then I fork them, I've only lost the queen for a rook and a queen. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, that turned out to be better. Okay, ooh-wee, 40 minutes. Do I have any checks? Yes, I do have a check. It's not mate, though. It's close. Because that only leaves the king one legal move. And then, I mean, I could follow up with the pawn check, but then the king goes to g4. And I could follow with another pawn check, f5, but then the king captures on g5. Should I play that first? If I play f5, what's my opponent going to do? Because if I play f5 first, I'm setting up mate. Because then there would be the check here, and that would be mate. h4, mate. Whereas if I play the knight check first, and the king moves, and I check on h4, the king comes forward, and then this isn't mate because the king takes this pawn, because the knight's not guarding it anymore, because the knight's up here now. And then that pawn, that pawn would still be guarded. Maybe bringing the knight back would be mate. That's pretty complex. But it makes me think I should move f3 first, setting up check and mate. But if I play f3 first, I think white's going to do one of two things. They're not going to check me here because my knight is still here guarding that square. But they might put their bishop here. No. Wow, I had my diagonal messed up. I thought the bishop would pin my knight, but no, my king's not on a light square. Well, it's one of those two things. I don't have any good captures. And that's the only check it's not the only check I have. I have g4 check. But in that case, the king moves out, and then there's no follow-up. Or the pawn, or the knight captures. Probably the pawn first, and then, yeah, so that check is no good. This check forces this. Check with h4. Forces this. Check with f3. Would force this. And then I don't have any follow-up checks because pulling the knight back would be a check, but then the king picks up the h4 pawn. So I think I have to play f3 first. I'm sorry, f5 first. I'm going to try it. That was not it. Okay. And that's the worst part of the survival is I can't immediately go check and see what I got wrong. But I did get something wrong. No. My first thought was to do this to remove the defender of the rook, but that's not going to work because white has 3 pieces guarding that square. So that's not it. I do have a check here and a check here. I think that check is no good because of the pawn and the bishop guarding that square. What about knight to h3 check? What happens then? The king can't come forward because my queen guards those 2 squares. So with my knight on h3, the king would have to go back. No, the king would only have 1 legal move. Cool, right? Because my rook cuts off these squares. So I think that's it. I think it's knight to h3 check. The king goes back. I check, and then their only legal move at that point would be to move the rook, and I would take it guarded by my knight, and that would be mate. Pretty sure. Because the king still has no legal moves. It has to block. All right. Well, that one was rated 1534, but was much easier for me than the previous puzzle. I do have a check, and that pawn is pinned by my rook. So this pawn could take. What happened if that pawn captured? Do I have any way in there? No, I really don't have a way in there. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. It's something on the H file. Yeah, I've seen these before because of all my basically a sideways battery on the back rank. That's a check. And my knight is currently protected by the bishop, and it's guarding these 2 squares. So when I capture on h2, the king's only legal move will be to take back, and then I come here. It's got to be that. None of white's pieces are guarding h2 except the king, and that has to be it. Okay. That one was also from, pretty sure, very close to something in the Bobby Fischer book. Okay. My queen is in danger from that rook. I do have a couple of checks. Let me do the worst ones first. That's bad because white's queen guards the corner. And I think checking here, here, or here would be bad because the king guards those spots. I can check here or here. And what's the difference between those two? If I check on the back rank on G2 or G1, the king can come forward. And they would have a follow-up with the queen or the bishop. If I checked over here on F4, the king, it could, the rook could block that check. Or the king could move out of the way 3 different ways. But the king can't block this check. I mean, the rook can't block that check, so that would be fairly forcing one of those two moves. If it moved to d2, I would have the follow-up with either the queen or the bishop. The bishop would probably be better at that point because the queen would be cutting off the back rank. I could also check with the bishop first, and that might be better because the king can't come forward right now because my queen is cutting that off. So the bishop check forces the king here or here. Then I check on the back rank. But then it can come forward, whichever spot it had gone to. It could still come forward, but then I can go there protected by the bishop. Maybe. So I think the bishop check first is better. I mean, I don't think they're going to take it with the queen. If they did, I would take this first and then take back so that they wouldn't be left with a rook on the board. Because if I took the queen first, then they would take my queen and that would be check, and I would have no pieces left. Okay. But yeah, I think the bishop check is better as first because right now the bishop is pointing at nothing, blocked by its own pawn. If the bishop check first and the queen cuts off the second rank, the king has to move from one side to the other. I come down to g1 check, and then I can easily move to this square, which is now guarded by the bishop. But if I do the queen check first, the king gets away, I think. So I'm going to try this. Okay, that was it, and the king went that way. There's nothing better than this, right? They still wouldn't be able to block. Only legal move would be to come out. I would come here, and then the only legal move would be there, in which case I can check here, protected by this pawn, and the only legal move would be there, in which case I could pick up the rook. I'm going to try it. This is getting long. Okay. I think it has to be this. Now it has to be this. Nothing else, right? Nothing else presents itself. Because that check, the rook blocks. Taking the rook loses a queen. And nothing else, and everything else is not check. Yeah, that would be really bad. So I'm going to go to where I'm protected by the pawn. And now the question is, do I take the rook first? It's not a check. And I'm in danger of check myself. Surely it's not some sort of pawn check, because no, then the queen takes and the queen's protecting the rook. There is this check, but then we have a queen trade, and I'm down a piece, so I think I have to take the rook. Okay. 29. I'm 2 away from my record, and I've still only missed 1. I know you can't see it because my camera's in the way. If you're still here, man, good for you. You've got a lot of patience. Okay. This queen has infiltrated, but I don't know if that's a good idea. I do have a couple of checks, but that one, it looks like the king just recaptures, and I don't have a follow-up. There is a check here, but the knight recaptures. And then I do have a follow-up with this rook, but then the king escapes, and I don't have a follow-up. That makes me wonder if I shouldn't take the knight first. But no, if I take the knight first, the queen captures my bishop and checks me here, and I have to get away. And then the queen checks me again, and I have to come here. Okay, but then if they check me again, I can block with my rook. Something to think about. But yeah, because if I capture the rook first and the knight recaptures, I do have that check, which leaves my king vulnerable. Whoa, sorry. Did that show up? Oh, I had a big pop-up menu show up. Then once I do, no, not only that, the rook could block. The rook can block, or the king could move out of the way. So that's not good. However, this threatens mate on g2. It takes a piece and it threatens checkmate. And then I think White's only option at that point would be to take my bishop with check. And my only legal move, well, besides bringing the rook back to be captured, or my queen here to be captured, would be to move my king. They could come back with check. And then I could move my king. And then they could come back with check, but then I could block with the rook. I think I would be okay. I'm going to try it. Okay, that was it, and they did what I thought. I don't think either one of these blocking moves makes any sense whatsoever, because I think the queen would just take it. So I think it has to be king to f2. That I was not expecting. I thought the queen was just going to check again here, but then I guess I would have blocked protected by the knight, and that would have been okay. Okay, well, I can't take with my king because of the bishop, but I can take with the pawn. And I'm not going to take with my queen because of the bishop, I think. And also my queen is still threatening mate here, so I think I'm going to take with the pawn. Okay. Sorry, that rook move came out of nowhere, so maybe that was their best move. And I'm one move away from my record. Oh, goodness. Do I have any checks? Yes, I do have checks. I have multiple checks. Even though I'm down in exchange, we both have queens, but I only have a knight for their rook. But I have a check here on h2, which the queen could block and lose to a pawn. But I think even better is this check. Can they do anything at all about that? I think that's checkmate on f8. Because they don't have anything that can block, nothing that can capture me there, and the king can't move. I think that's checkmate. Now, this is tempting for a different reason, because as I said, if the queen blocks here, I would capture it. If the queen blocks here, I would capture it with the pawn. And if I checked down here and the king moved, I was going to say I thought there was a fork here, but no, the rook covers that square. Okay, so I think that's checkmate. It was, and now I've tied my record. Okay. Oh, we're almost done, I promise. Also, I've got to go eat lunch. Oh, what is it? Oh, and I'm down a whole piece. No, I'm black. I'm up a piece. I'm playing with the black pieces. We both have a pawn and a rook and a king, but I have a knight. That has to be significant. The knight is cutting off two squares, and the rook is cutting off this square. The pawn is cutting off that square. Wait. If the pawn is cutting off the pawn is cutting off those two squares, the knight is cutting off that square, I think that's checkmate. It would be protected by the knight, because the knight also cuts off that square. And then the rook would be cutting off that square. Oh, a new record, and I still haven't missed one. I mean, I've still only missed one. Okay. I'm vastly encouraged by this. Okay, I have a couple of different possibilities here. because my bishop cuts off the king from moving forward, I have checks down here with the queen and with the rook. My king is very exposed as well. The rook I don't think is best, because then when the king moves back, I don't have the follow-up check due to the black's remaining rook. So it makes me think queen to e7 check is best, because my rook cuts off all these squares, my bishop cuts off that one, my queen would be cutting off these. Then wherever the king moved, I could follow with a rook check. No, that rook is still there. Wait, what about this jack? Queen to f2. Because that leaves the king only one legal move. And then that would be mate. That's it. That's got to be it. The rook leaves two legal moves, and then I can't check on the back rank without being hit by the rook. One of these checks here leaves the king multiple legal moves, and I don't have a good follow-up because of the rook on the back rank. This forces the king to only one square, and then moving the bishop would... No, that's not checkmate because of their bishop. I still say that's best because it's more forcing. The king can only go to h8. And then... this bishop move threatens mate. If I put the bishop on h6, it would be threatening mate on g7. No, because their bishop still guards that square. Their bishop, get it in my head, their bishop guards all these squares. Also, even if the bishop wasn't there and I checked and they went back and I went here, that's not check, it's just a threat. And then they have leeway to begin checking me down here. Okay, so I have to be very careful. Check. I could take off that pawn at that point and be threatening something over here. I think these two are just, they're further away, so they give the king more options. This one seemed okay because it was still guarding that square for the rook, but that doesn't help with their rook. So I think it has to be this one. That was not it. Okay, that's fine. Okay. I am playing with the black pieces. I think if I don't take this rook, they take mine. If they take mine, I take back. They move this king forward. I have a pawn that can promote. Should I do that instead? If I capture and they recapture with the pawn and I recapture, then their king catches my pawn and they're the only ones with the passed pawn. I think I move my passed pawn, let them take me, I take back, and then they can't catch my passed pawn. Oh, I'm in check. Well, I guess I have to take it then. Or do I move out of check? No. Surely that's not right. So do I have to take it? Because if I take it, and they take me back, I take them back, they catch my pawn. And the best I can get is a draw. That was it. And surely it's not to take the... Oh, no. I don't have to take it because I'm guarding the promotion square. Okay. Wow. 33. See, I have been practicing my end games. Okay, I do have checks, but they don't look great. That's guarded right now. Wait, is this like a Morphe's mate or whatever that was called? Or the opera mate where this bishop figures into it somehow? Do I need the other rook over there first? I can't remember if I need the other rook over there first, or if that's even what this is. Because right now I have a check, but they capture. I have this. Okay, nope, that's what it is. That's what it is. I give up this rook for them to capture. I check here. Their only legal move is to go back to one of those two squares, and then I can bring this rook, I think. That wasn't it. Okay. Well, thank you for watching. I got 33 today. I am going to take a look at the ones I missed, but this video is already over an hour long. We'll see you next time.